Hi, Molly.
Hello, how are you doing, Michelle?
Good, how are you?
All right.
So we should introduce ourselves. My name's Michelle Goldberg. I'm a senior writer for the Daily Beast and Newsweek.
And my name is Mollie Ziegler Hemingway, and I'm a contributor and editor to GetReligion.org and Ricochet.com.
And so, it's funny. I think we were going to start out by talking about Dominique Strauss-Kahn and then another sex scandal from a man who has a history of sexual harassment broke this morning, which is Schwarzenegger and his, people are calling it a love child. I think that is still, I think it remains to be seen whether you can call the child of a housekeeper of a man with a history of sexual violence and harassment
also
a love child.
It's just a weird term in general. I mean, are we supposed to believe that his other 4 children are not love children? I mean, it's a complicated story, but it demeans everyone to call one a love child. When again, how loving is it to impregnate your housekeeper and keep her hidden from what's going on and keep everybody in the dark and lying to your wife? That doesn't seem very loving at all, and it sounds again like the same issue. This is not the action of a loving man, really.
Well, I remember during the whole Clinton imbroglio and during other scandals, I think probably like many other liberals, maybe bought into the French sense of superiority on these matters and, thought, oh, why can't we be, kind of sophisticated and realistic like the French about people's sexual appetites and, a person, kind of sexual fidelity has no bearing on a person's fitness for office. And I still believe that to a certain extent, but I also think that this recent scandal with DHS has laid bare the dark side of French sexual sophistication.
Right.
It's one thing to say that, kind of what consenting adults do in their private lives should remain private, even if you want to go into public office. And it's another, but I think it seems to be being, that kind of blasé attitude seems to be being used to minimize and excuse patterns of violence and coercion.
Right. I mean, I was not someone who thought that we should be taking our cues on morality from the French during the Clinton era, but wow, is this kind of a wake-up call no matter where you were on that there is a huge downside. I mean, the way we don't know what happened with Dominique Strauss-Kahn. We have no idea yet, and the facts will come out. But we do know that the way people are responding to it is somewhat horrifying. So you have Bernard-Henri Lévy basically defending rape, which is kind of what he does for a living, I guess. And you have all these people saying, based on the facts that they know or the allegations that they've heard, that this is just something that should be brushed away or excused. We all know how DSK is, and this is just American Puritanism at its worst. And it's like, no, I mean, again, we don't know what's going to be the case.
Think
but
that kind of this, the thing is that we don't know the facts. And I actually think that if you wanted to, what was so egregious to me about Bernard-Henri Lévy's defense of DSK is that he wasn't kind of saying this shows up the fact that the American justice system can be very brutal to people who haven't yet been convicted of a crime. I mean, I think that there's legitimate criticisms to be made of the whole institution of the perp walk, for example.
I agree, yes.
Or even of kind of, long pretrial detention. Mm-hmm. But that's not the argument he made. The argument he made, and I wish I had the quote in front of me because it was really amazing. It was kind of saying that he was outraged that the judge treated DHS
like
as
those other
a
people?
Subject to justice like any other.
I know. It was...
as opposed to, I guess, a friend of Bernard-Henri Lévy's. And this actually seemed to show up America, if for all its criticism, for all, the kind of terrible inequities of the American justice system, the fact that somebody like DHS would be treated as a subject to justice like any other is actually something to be kind of proud of.
Right. We consider this a feature, and it was kind of surprising to find out that not just Henri Lévy, but other people were considering it a bug. And it was just weird because, the head of the Green Party, I think, also said something similar, which was just – and the French do have a completely different legal system where they accord many more rights to the accused up until the moment of conviction and whatnot. So I understand that there is a difference there.
And I agree with that legal system. But then you make the criticism that this legal system, that this shows up the faults of a legal system, not that kind of special dispensation should be made for this man because he's rich and powerful.
But the other thing that kind of annoyed me was the way that people were, you saw all those foreign headlines about women bringing this man down and blaming women for his problems, when this is, no matter what else happens with this particular case, we know he's a predator. We know he does not respect his own vows. He has no problem coercing subordinates into sexual relationships. And that, that's enough to wonder why
you said, I guess where we probably differ is where you said, we know he doesn't respect his own vows. I mean, I really don't care whether or not politicians respect their own vows, and it seems like maybe you do, and maybe that part of it is something I think that we could maybe learn from the French. To me, it's a matter of no concern whatsoever, a person's kind of private sexual life. It is, what's so frustrating to me is the way issues of coercion and violence are getting kind of chalked up to womanizing, and objection to coercion and violence is becoming just a feature of American Puritanism. He wasn't arrested for having an affair. He was arrested for what seems like a very violent attack, and and knowing what I know of this country's justice system, police do not typically rush to arrest
high-ranking foreign officials,
unless they have some kind of real evidence.
Right, which clearly was there, and she picked him out of the lineup and all that. Of course, we're not even discussing whether the big conspiracy theory about whether this was a setup or not, but we haven't seen, there have been lots of discussions of that, but not a lot of substantiation of that charge.
Yeah, but they're really ridiculous. I mean, I think, the one thing that Henri Levy said was that he thought it was strange that one maid would enter a hotel room on her own.
We all know that the Midtown Manhattan practice is for 2 chambermaids at once.
Right, and I live in New York, so I don't stay in a lot of New York hotels, but I do stay in, I've stayed in hotels, I've stayed in Sofitels in many cities.
Lucky you.
And
that's actually the other thing that I just can't believe. The Sofitel, $3,000 a night suite, the first class on Air France, his unbelievably nice 6-figure salary with the $75,000 stipend to supplement that salary so he can entertain appropriately and whatnot.
I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, he's independently wealthy. His wife is incredibly rich. There's no evidence that he was doing any of this on the IMF.
Right. I just think it's funny because he's the Socialist Party candidate. But
a 6-figure salary for a kind of person, I mean, 6 figures can mean a lot of things, right? I don't know. I mean, it would be kind of scandalous if the IMF paid the person in charge a 5-figure salary.
Right.
So,
it's about $500,000 or something plus. Then there's this.
What?
I think he gets about $500,000 plus a $75,000 stipend. It's nice, particularly considering how much damage the IMF does worldwide. But that's a different topic altogether. So.
Right, and then the thing that's kind of depressing, and I don't really know enough about this to comment on it a lot, but it seems, listening to people who do know what they're talking about on this issue, it seems like he's actually been a force for good in the IMF as a whole in terms of reform and making it less kind of destructive and autocratic.
I don't know,
which is unfortunate, and that's part of kind of Bernard Henri Levy's argument is that he's done all these good things, which is utterly besides the point.
Right. Well, that's the same.
He even talked about
absolutely the same argument that liberals made in Clinton's defense. Remember, I forget who that writer was that said she would personally fillet Bill Clinton for all he'd done.
Oh, Erica Jong.
Right. So, but back to the issue about whether the way someone handles their marriage arrangement might tell you something about the rest of the arrangement. I think you see even take the case of Schwarzenegger, who was engaged in fraudulent behavior even in his own marriage, but was also kind of inconsistent as a politician. You take John Ensign, for whom this report came out last week about his affair. And the affair was a horrible story. It was an absolutely horrible story about how this guy set out to destroy his own family and the family of and then another family. But then it quickly, very quickly, went into obstruction of justice and government corruption. He was basically hurting people that weren't going to help him cover up this crime that he'd committed with his with the husband of the woman he was having an affair with. And so you can see quickly that having, this immoral behavior in his own marriage just quickly spiraled out of control. And I think that that's why historically people have looked, you should never, ever, ever put your faith in any man, much less a politician, because we're all, we all mess up, we all sin. But you can see how people have looked to private behavior as an indicator of something about whether a man is trustworthy or not. And, there's wisdom in this, I think, in judging people according to how they treat their wife, how they treat their husband, how they treat their children, and even just how they treat other people in their lives.
I think I don't agree. I don't disagree that there's wisdom in how a person treats their wife is, evidence of aspects of their character. But I don't think it's dispositive. I don't think that JFK, for example, should have been. I think it would have been a real shame if JFK had been denied office because he was a philanderer. And this also goes back to the argument about Bill Clinton. I thought it was egregious that he was impeached for his affair with Monica Lewinsky.
But he was impeached for obstruction of justice, which was related, of course. But go on.
I thought that the fact that his affair with Monica Lewinsky struck me as being kind of not very telling about his fitness for office, because it was despite the power differential, and that's where things get complicated, right? Because so often there are such serious power differentials in these relationships. In that case,
between president and intern, yes.
Right, but it was pretty. It was pretty clearly consensual.
Right.
There was no element of coercion there. I think the kind of power differential was an aphrodisiac on both sides. Clinton's past raises other questions. The other women in his past, like Paula Jones.
Right. Very similar charges to what's going on with this IMF guy, too. I do have to say I'm totally impressed that Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to keep this quiet for 10 years. He did not strike me as that bright of a person in order to be able to handle that kind of secret and do what it took to keep that secret for that long. And not just from the state of California, but from his wife. That is
and the
impressive.
other amazing thing, right, is that the woman lived with them, I think.
Or,
right. She's being described as the housekeeper, or at least she was kind of part in their lives. And, Maria knew the kid and just thought that the kid, that she had the kid with her husband. But you got to think a 10-year-old son of, I don't know if it's a son, a 10-year-old child of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a distinctive looking person.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, we have to give kudos to Maria for actually leaving once she found out. She's distinguishing herself among Kennedy ladies by actually not standing for this. And, she seems to have been handling it with grace and aplomb. And I'm really
but I think part of the message is that she should have, it's kind of amazing that that Schwarzenegger's history of, again, not just sexual misbehavior, but violent coercion.
Right. Not even that long ago, too. Right. Yeah.
And it's not even denied. He didn't really even deny it. He more or less kind of said it could be, and he didn't mean to offend anyone, and he apologizes for, dozens of instances of groping and, kind of forcibly trying to take his clothes off.
I think he also had the Clintonian defense that certain types of sex were not actually sex or weren't cheating or something like that, too. So she had to...
But that doesn't matter.
What I'm saying is, it's not like this behavior was unknown to her if it's known to the Los Angeles Times. She knew.
Well, right, no, it was certain. But again, it doesn't really matter that it was unknown to her. What I think matters is that she kind of essentially helped paper it over, and when these things, and she kind of provided, a moral alibi of sorts, or she, it was her kind of standing up for him that allowed him to get beyond, again, what is not, what matters is not that he cheated on her. It's that he was, is that he violently harassed a lot of women. And it's kind of amazing that people were able to look beyond, that.
Right.
I think that we're learning some of the wrong lessons from our sexual scandals. I mean, I do think people should learn the lesson that sex is private and complicated and relationships are private and complicated. That doesn't mean that it's kind of a mark of worldly sophistication to overlook, violent predatory behavior.
Yeah, I just also think we need to understand that sexual mores develop for a reason, and even if you take something like why marriage has developed as an institution, it's really about keeping children from being born to your housekeeper. And, it's about sort of controlling reproductive sex and making sure that children are raised by their own parents and making sure that there aren't messy situations like this. We sometimes forget why the institution of marriage exists.
But how does that exactly work? Because in most countries, in most of the world, it is hardly, even places with very kind of strict sexual mores, it is hardly uncommon for men to have children out of wedlock with other women that they
kind of the point. In fact, I think
that I don't see how the institution of marriage.
I think the idea is if you didn't have these strict boundaries around marriage, you would have so much more of that, just because it's the instinct to sort of sow your seed wildly. It's a very low cost behavior for a husband. It's a high cost behavior for a wife. It's a high cost behavior for all women, actually, because they're the ones that bear the children and are, have them for the rest of time. And so marriage is a way of keeping that in a sort of healthier way, even, just making sure children are raised by their own parents, because otherwise it would just be.
I know that's the conservative argument for marriage, but it doesn't seem to me that that's kind of how marriage has.
I don't think that's like a concern. That's kind of what it does. That's what it's done throughout all history and time, is sort of organize this behavior in a safer environment so that women and children are protected.
No, but what you're arguing, I think, is that there was somehow kind of less, that men were somehow in a time when kind of marital strictures were more involatile, that men were less predatory outside of marriage. No,
I'm not. I'm just talking about like what marriage does and how it acts. I know it has different mores across different cultures and whatnot.
But where has it done this? I guess that's what I'm saying. Where has it
just like in general, when we hear that Arnold Schwarzenegger has a second family, we go, ooh, that's bad, because we know marriage is supposed to be monogamous and you're supposed to be faithful and you're supposed to not have a second family, because that can cause all sorts of problems for the kids and for the wives, or the temporary wives or whatnot. We recoil in horror because we see the bad effects, and that's marriage serves that function. The norms of monogamy and fidelity developed around to protect this idea. It's like we all would want to be sleeping with everyone else if we didn't have if there were no downsides to it. And so society sort of works together to say, this is why it's bad. Don't do it. We're going to ostracize you if you do. We're going to condemn you. These are the norms that we're going to associate with marriage.
To me, what you're describing seems to me to be something that hasn't existed anywhere ever. And I know in certain sense that's.
I'm not saying there's ever been a society where there's no cheating by spouses.
I understand what you're saying. No society ever lives up to its ideal. But I don't even see that that's how marriage has functioned, or that's how monogamy. And I'm very actually pro-marriage. I think in general it's a pretty underrated institution. But it seems that traditionally, kind of traditional conceptions of marriage have basically meant that that rules about women's chastity are very strictly enforced, and kind of other compensatory institutions creep up so that men can, men are expected to, certainly pay lip service to ideas of monogamy, but are very rarely expected to actually enact them. And there's a whole kind of, and there's all kinds of ways that society organizes itself to give men this outlet. I mean, that's to me.
I'm sure
that's
obviously true of like even, you know, secular America, and it's certainly true of other countries too. I mean, there are also subcultures, like I'm Christian, and that would be very much frowned upon in our subculture, where men are expected to remain faithful to their spouses and wives are expected to remain faithful to their spouses, and that has, you know, some serious religious reasons for it. You know, most religious cultures will have
Jew,
that.
And the men I know are also expected to remain faithful to their
spouses. And that doesn't mean that they're going to. I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't side things set up to enable them to cheat or whatnot. There will always be that. But the less strict you understand marriage, the more those norms go away, and the more acceptable that formerly hidden behavior gets. And that's, you know, that's.
See, I disagree. I actually think that that the fact that kind of male infidelity is much more public and much more frowned upon has more to do with feminism and kind of demands that if people are going to pay lip service to marriage, that men abide by the same set of rules that women are expected to abide by. I think that public shift has much more to do with feminism than it does with the institutions of monogamy and marriage.
Huh. That's very curious. I mean, it seems to me that you've got all these children being born out of wedlock outside of the institution of marriage. It's like 40% of all children now. That's post-feminism. That doesn't seem to be something that's making for a more equitable handling of child raising, right?
Well, those are very. I mean, I think that that 40% it's really difficult to look at that 40% as a single unit. I mean, there's kind of people, you know, there's people who have kind of Scandinavian arrangements who aren't married but are basically co-parents,
right.
And then there's people who are, and then there's women who are, you know, who are raising children on their own by choice, and then there's women who have been basically abandoned by men who are taking advantage of the sexual freedom that was unleashed partly by feminism and partly by the
right. It's just that if you're born out of wedlock, that's like the single biggest predictor of being raised in poverty. It's a very difficult financial arrangement for women. I don't understand what the argument would be that feminism has made for. I mean, maybe among elites it's less acceptable or something like that. Although
feminism is clearly made for kind of. I mean, I think that there's a lot of evidence that feminism has made for more equitable marriages and.
Like that, yeah. But
it has also, I think, I mean, it is a very new thing in America that kind of powerful men. You know, not the idea that kind of powerful men are not entitled to the sexual spoils of their power, which is, you know, one of the ideas that kind of underlies all of so many of these sex scandals, is one of the things that makes them scandals in the first place.
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, you ask Puritans back a few hundred years and they would disagree. I think that probably the case is that powerful men always have and always will think that they have the right to these things, and they will destroy other people. Again, the John Ensign report shows how many people had to be destroyed so that he could think he was having an affair that wasn't really very productive for anyone. And I think that will always be the case, and it always was the case, because basically human nature is going to be the same. The question is, you know, what type of institutions will we put in place to protect those who are most likely to be hurt when powerful men or even unpowerful men do these things? And I think those things have kind of changed. But I think probably it's just going to be the same human nature story throughout time. Wait, this seems like a good time to segue into my favorite political spouse story that's like flipping all this on its head, which is the Mitch Daniels story. I just love that this is totally the opposite of how these stories normally go. So Mitch Daniels.
You know, I would never. I mean, there's obviously no circumstance in which I'm going to support a Republican, but I find this whole story to me seems like it reflects immensely well on Mitch Daniels.
I know but I mean, who knows? Maybe when the story comes out, we're going to be horrified by the actual details or whatnot. But it seems to me like amazing that. Well, here,
why don't you quickly summarize it? You know, assuming that maybe not everyone who's watching followed this.
Okay, I think Mitch and Sherry Daniels have 4 daughters or 4 kids. She leaves after 15 years, marries another man for a few years, then divorces him. And by the way, leaves leaves the whole family, leaves her husband and the children, which is just not typical. And she goes and marries this other man. Then she leaves him and comes back to the family. The Daniels family is reunited. Second marriage is a charm, apparently, and it's just totally flipping the conventional political story on its head. It's like the opposite of Newt Gingrich in how
right, and also that his that one of the reasons that he's hesitating to run for president is because he doesn't necessarily want to subject her to the scrutiny that would bring.
Yeah, and
to me, he just comes out of this looking like such a stand-up guy.
Right. And I mean, again, I always try and make sure that I'm prepared for however horrible the story might get.
Right, yeah, maybe he drove her away and did something awful, and who knows.
Right, and because, of course, whatever the story is, it's going to be a complicated one, and there's never one side completely right and one side completely wrong. But it is kind of a nice, happy ending story, and it shows a level of maturity for Mitch Daniels to be able to have his wife leave and for him to accept her back with open arms that takes a very mature person, I think, who is looking out for his entire family, and I'm just kind of impressed by it. Again,
how do you think that will? I mean, I think that assuming if the kind of contours of the story are basically what we think they are. It seems to me that, women might find it romantic. But I wonder if men will find it
weak.
Yeah.
I actually already had, there's been a lot of chatter about Daniels for months, and I've noticed that some men in particular, not all men, like I know a lot of men who think he's just kind of a badass for doing it this way. Other men seem to think there's a weakness there, that he should, it's not even that he took his wife back, which I think almost everyone would universally agree is like a good thing if it can happen. It's that he's possibly not going to run on account of her. So I've heard some men say that, she owes him big time. And it's like, that we really shouldn't use language of debt when talking about putting your family through something that really only insane people do, which is run for president. And so it's that issue of him, they think that it's okay for the first step, but then he must always assert his headship in a way that makes sure that his wife and kids never think that they have any control over him or something like that. I don't know. It's weird. I don't quite get it, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
So we only have a couple of minutes left before we move on to third day. But the one thing I wanted to talk about that's maybe slightly less serious than all this is the tremendous hype over Bridesmaids, which I think you haven't seen it yet, right?
I have not seen it yet. I am kind of embarrassed to admit that I'm organizing a lady group for Friday night so we can watch it together. But I'm really excited about the movie, and I've read lots of. That's my friend upset that I was just looking off screen. She's upset that she will not be part of this movie showing on Friday night. She already saw it, so she gave me the goods on it, and I think it's really funny how much people are investing in this one light comedy. It's like the be-all, end-all of what you think about females in film, and it's really sad.
But I think part of it is that when you see it, and maybe we'll talk again after you see it, but when you see it, it really is shocking how, because in certain ways it is just like a kind of fairly, typical, comedy kind of buddy movie. And then you think about just how you never see these kind of things. There's two things about it that I think are kind of astonishing. And again, I think part of what's amazing about it is that it's not presented as, it's not a big feminist movie, right? It's about kind of wedding fever and female jealousy and female friendship and marriage. So it's not, but there are a couple of things that are amazing and that seem very organic. I mean, one of them is that the Kristen Wiig character, her kind of heartbreak and the thing that derailed her life and the thing that kind of destroyed her confidence is the fact that her business failed and she doesn't have a career. Mm-hmm. She has these kind of bad relationships, but those are kind of adjuncts. Her real crisis is a crisis of, kind of professional identity. And then the other thing is just how little the men talk. It's, I don't think that Maya Rudolph's fiance has a line in the movie.
I kind of love that. Not that I think that's in general a good idea,
intentional
but...
What?
I don't think in general it's a good idea to do that, but I love what they're saying there, like just pointing out how this is normally reversed. And
right, exactly. Yeah, not that I think that men shouldn't talk in movies, but it's so intentional that it really highlights the degree to which if this was reversed, you'd barely even notice the fact that the pretty girl doesn't say anything. I mean, not that she's so pretty.
Okay, bear with me for a second, but I remember one time being in the Louvre and seeing these amazing sculptures that were like 2,000 years old. Just amazing precision and just beautiful art. And I was thinking, isn't it sad that humanity is less able to do sculpture now than it was 2,000 years ago? Like, you never want to see your people declining in their skill set. And I think of that with females in film. I grew up watching lots of films from the 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And I mean, some really great roles for women. Men and women interacted on the screen together in ways that didn't always have to do with sex. I mean, it was shocking. And then somehow, I don't know what happened, but like we have just plummeted off the cliff where if it's not sex, you don't see these, like, you don't see any decent interaction. Or it's either not sex, it's either sex or really dramatically not sex. You know, it's like a really, like it's like hitting you over the head with the idea that these people are different sexes, but they would never interact. You know, there's just, it's like the whole art form just died, and it's really sad to watch it happen in such a short period of time. But I have hope when I see, these types of things too.
Don't you think it's partly, though, just because of the, like the rise of video and cable and all of these things mean that, the film audience is no longer seen as the general public. It's seen as like a very particular subset of teenage boys that need to be catered to. And, that's always been the assumption, at least. I mean, what's so great about Bridesmaids is just that the money involved will hopefully convince people that there are women who will go to the movies if there's something for them to see.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been a couple of good years on this front, and there are a lot of really good female comedy writers, and so these films have been successful, so we will see more of it. But hopefully the next phase will be maybe a film where men and women can interact on screen, and we won't have to make a statement about, one sex or the other not talking, taking away people's voices.
I would also,
and it would be.
I don't know.
Go on.
What's that?
I was just going to say one other thing, which is it would be nice if there were enough films about women in their day-to-day lives that we wouldn't have to pin all of our hopes and dreams on one film, or like everything that we care about wouldn't have to be viewed through one goofy film about bridesmaids. I mean, it'd be nice if there were a variety of different films that could explore female themes. But anyway.
And that's actually why the one thing that I did really hate about this movie, like I really hate scatological humor, like a lot.
Yeah.
Like I hate I hate it. Like I think it doesn't make me laugh. It usually leaves me feeling a kind of a sense of like queasy, alienated despair because I don't understand why other people think it's funny. I'm not sure how much this is gendered because I've talked to other people.
It's totally gendered. Okay, go on. Yeah.
I've talked to other women who find this stuff hysterical and kind of object to my hypothesis that it is that women are less likely to find this stuff funny.
Huh.
My theory about why women are less likely to find this stuff funny is because, like, assuming that kind of comedy at some deep level is about the distance between, like the kind of humans, like, sad struggle for dignity in the world and the indignity of the physical functions is just, that's like a much more kind of fraught and even tragic tension for women.
Huh.
That's my
okay.
Unworked out theory. But so there is this super gross, horrible food poisoning scene in the movie.
Yeah.
That it reminded me of when I went to go see, I was writing about the Passion of the Christ. So I went to the Mecca Mall, because I was in Jordan at the time, to go see the Passion of the Christ. And one of the torture scenes started, but the scene where they're whipping him with a whip with razor blades. And I left and went to the bathroom and kind of, washed my hands for a long time and came back and it was still going on. Watching it was like, I didn't leave, but I kind of wish I had, and it was like a similarly unpleasant experience. And it seemed, reading about the film, Judd, it wasn't in the original script. It was something that kind of Judd Apatow demanded that they put in. And that the producers, or that, Kristen Wiig and the other screenwriter were skeptical about, but that they eventually succumb to. And I really felt like it was like the toll that I was being asked to pay to watch a comedy about women.
Right.
Like, fine, you can watch something about ladies, but first you're going to have to endure like something that's like really disgusting and degrading.
Right.
And,
maybe,
and if you can't laugh at it, that just is because you're uptight and don't have a sense of humor.
So maybe there's a deeper thing there too, though, about how Judd Apatow wants men to see this film too. And despite what your friends say, I think it's indisputable that men have a higher tolerance and enjoyment of scatological humor than women. Even though I also not only know women who enjoy that kind of humor, I'm a mother to one of them. But I think that maybe the idea is like you can bring men in to see a film like this where they learn more about female themes and whatnot. And he always has this kind of, I always feel like there's something very subversive to his comedy, where he's trying to get some messages across, and maybe that's what he was going for. Get men in to see the film. They can feel like they're seeing a legit Judd Apatow comedy man, and then you slide in the female humor. I don't know.
No, I guess. No, I think that you're right. That yes, the scene was clearly a bid to bring men in. I guess my point is that they don't need to have a shopping sequence in the middle of Transformers to bring women in, right? You don't expect men to sit through something that they're going to hate, just so women come to the movie.
Yes.
And that's what was so irritating to me. It was like that's kind of like the price of getting it done.
Yeah,
that
I think
it's not really going to be a movie. It's that you still kind of have to make these concessions.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for ending on a very depressing note.
You know what? I've done a bunch of Talking Heads, and it always ends on a really depressing note.
Well, anyway, I hope that I can enjoy Bridesmaids and just enjoy the comedy.
Yeah, you know what? But it is. I mean, it is a really good movie.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, great.
All right, well, thanks so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll talk again later. Okay, bye.